Let's try it again. Reset. So we heard this. It was really cool. We heard that I'm suffering right now. I'm summarizing of what we said in the stream that we lost. So we heard this. We heard that I'm suffering. Let's go. Great. Let's stop suffering and go. So I want us to identify. I want us to identify the rationale behind synthesizers. Like, why do they exist? I want us to identify the basic components of some of the synths that we're going to use. And I want us to remember an overview of the history of the synthesizer. And we'll see a lot of historical details and understand some really important players and people on the synth scene that are really cool. And well, I guess that our goal will be to write some electronic music, and we will be writing electronic music together. And I know you have done a lot of this, but yeah. I want us to visualize Fourier again. Like, there are some things here that I think we have already discussed, because I changed my program, and it can be that if you feel that you already know this, I'll jump, but there are some things that I want to start from. I have this question there, which is like, is the mind capable of infinity? Like, we will discuss this question. And we'll talk about the early days of synths, the 60s, the 70s, monophonic versus polyphonic. We will talk about Bob Moog, which I guess maybe you have heard that name somewhere. We will talk about a person called Wendy Carlos, that if you don't know about this person, you will know today. We'll talk about the 80s. And we'll start seeing basic concepts, and we will be identifying some sounds. So that's kind of what we have. So yeah, I know you know this guy because I have tortured you with him a lot, I guess, right? Yes, very much. And I will keep doing this until you graduate. I mean, I will just keep talking about Fourier all the time. So how do you think a synth work? I guess that you guys have an idea already. Just. Mm-hmm. What do you mean the whole thing? Like. But I'm asking how does it work? So I'm not asking what an LFO is. Like, I'm asking how. With a contour, okay. With a contour, with an envelope. What do you mean by? I just don't know this first word. The contour. Oscillating contour.
Yeah, so it's basically oscillator made
Mm-hmm.
of two pieces actually.
Yep.
Condensator and
Okay. No, of course.
you put some electricity there, and it oscillates between two of these pieces. Makes sound.
Okay, cool. No, that's close. I mean, that's where in the direction where it should be. By the way, firsthand, I had a conversation with Ice, and I know that you guys saw synths with him on Ableton, and we had an agreement, he and I, that I will not talk about synths on Ableton. I will talk about the synths like as a concept, you know. And I think it's useful anyways. But that's one thing I want you to know. I know that Anatoly, Ice, and you have discussed this already, but I will go deeper than that. Like, synths work by exploiting this reality, you know, that I can use simpler sounds to synthesize complex sounds. Synthesize, synth, you got it? Yep. So, I mean, obviously, what I'm doing when I'm creating a synth is grabbing those simpler components that you had back there and just mixing them together and put them together to create a more complex waveform. Yeah. There's a frequency modulator synthesis? No, that's an additive synthesizer.
In subtractive synthesis, you don't add waves to each other.
No. Well, I mean, you filter out information from a wave, but you have different oscillators and you sum them together in a mixer. Like, I understand what you mean. Mm-hmm. Of course they're summing. You have oscillator 1 and 2 and you're summing them with a mixer.
One wave does not modulate another.
You can modulate with an LFO. Like, it's just like you're misunderstanding maybe the concept of FM synthesis. FM synthesis is modulating as an oscillator so much that you change the nature of it by the carrier wave. But when you're doing subtractive synthesis, which we're going to talk about, and there is a list of things, and we will discuss them very clearly. When you're doing subtractive synthesis, you have two oscillators that are producing a sound, and then you're going to filter that oscillators, but you're also going to mix them together. So you're going to take basic components and create a more complex waveform. Yes, I mean, there is no question about that. You have oscillator 1, oscillator 2, and you have a mixer, and you blend those signals, and you create a new signal that is more complex. I mean, when you see the waveform, of that is produced by summing these oscillators, it looks like a complex waveform. It doesn't look like just. But anyways, I mean, we will discuss those things more clearly a little bit further ahead. So back to what I was trying to say before. Like, you are exploiting the fact of nature, then when you grab simpler waveforms, you can create a more complex waveform. Does this make sense to all of you? I see some faces there like, no?
Discussed it with Marvel.
Okay, cool. This lecture should not be about you guys telling me that you already discussed this with everybody, because, okay,
Sorry,
yeah, I get it, but I mean, I understand, but I mean, you don't have to remind me every 2 seconds. Like, I just really understand. Just like, I mean, I just want to carry on with my lecture and just to build a story, because I'm building a whole story. So this video, we saw it together, if I'm not mistaken. Have we? No? Amazing. Okay, so this video is going to represent some of the things that I want to say, and let's go. So this is going to take you a little bit towards the idea of how do we come to a complex waveform from simpler waveforms, okay? I'm really happy that you haven't seen this video, because I will torture you with this video for
This is what a
lot as
sine
well.
wave looks
But
like.
yeah,
And this is what a sine wave sounds like.
we really haven't seen this video together. Oof, I'm so happy about that, because it's amazing. Yeah.
This is what a sine wave looks like. And this is what a sine wave sounds like. This is what a sawtooth wave looks like. And this is what a sawtooth wave sounds like. The sawtooth wave can be decomposed into a sum of sine waves of different frequencies.
You get in the point, I guess, that, I mean, I can produce this sound just by decomposing it into simpler frequencies. And by the way, this is how everything we use works. Everything that we do. And I guess that you discussed it with Marvel, and that's really cool. And I'm happy that you guys have this basic knowledge. But we're going into the synth world, and to enter to the synth world, we need to enter through this door. You know, this is a Fourier transformation, and this is how you grab simpler waveforms and produce a more complex waveform. Let's carry on, because this video is cool.
This is what a triangle wave looks like. And this is what the triangle wave sounds like. This is what a square wave is. The square wave decomposed into a sum of We can also do this with natural sounds.
Hey. So this is really important, I mean, for other things that we will do in the future, that basically equalizers, for example, they just like take away parts of the components of something, right? And synthesizers just like put them together to produce something new in different ways. There are many techniques to achieve this. So you can either destroy or build with the same principles. Destroy, I mean equalize, so to remove something. Or build, I mean to synthesize something. And that's what the genius of Fourier is. He understood the mathematics of this in the 19th century, so feel terrible about yourself anytime you want when you cannot connect your YouTube to the right streaming key, and then you're like, oh shit, Fourier discovered all of this without any kind of computer or something. I put you here a video which is like a very, very advanced and absolutely outside of our scope, not for us, conversation about what is a Fourier transformation and what does it mean to do a Fourier transformation. And it's a visualization of them, and it's pretty cool. I mean, just so you have an idea kind of how this math looks like, but it's something kind of like this. This is kind of what's going behind the production of a complex waveform from simpler parts. Whether that is, it's this really, really good video. Like, I really recommend you to watch it because it explains a lot of really interesting stuff. You know, about how waveforms can be synthesized, and what does it mean to create a complex waveform. So the synthesis, of course, let me just, am I streaming well? Yeah, everything is cool. Hey, the synthesis is the process of creating sound electronically generating using analog electronic circuitry or code. Like, that's what we're doing when we're creating something from a synthesizer. So it's an electronic musical instrument, of course. They can be done, you can build synthesizers by using several different kinds of principles. It's like, luckily for us, there are more than one way to create a synth. So you can use a process called subtractive synthesis. This is kind of what Anton and I were talking a minute. You can use a process called additive synthesis, and you can use a process called frequency modulation. There are a lot other more, like wave tables, and there are many, many different kinds of synths, but these are kind of the ballpark. There is also AM synthesis, which is amplitude modulation. We will see them all, but this is kind of like the basic principles is subtractive, additive, and FM. It's what it's most of the synth work. And once you build a synth, and again, remember, a synth is just like a couple of oscillators and a mixer. Like, that's the most basic thing it is. What is an oscillator? Anton was trying to articulate this a couple of minutes ago. It's a circuitry that is making electricity oscillate or vibrate at a certain frequency. It's a circuitry that makes electricity vibrate at a certain frequency. And then it's sending instructions to whatever is connecting out from the output of it to vibrate at a certain rate. Like, that's basically what it is. And what you can do with that, well, it's really, really huge, obviously. So, and once you connect into a synthesizer these little modules called oscillators, you can add also to them other components like filters, envelopes, and low-frequency oscillators, and you start building and building and building stuff. The goal of this course will be, I mean, of this little synth part, will be to teach you how to use a modular synthesizer that is for free, that you will be able to download and install in your home. Whatever, is a really nice one. So we can actually, in the end, be making our own sounds and building something from zero, and that you can see a modular synthesizer and just think like, that's what I want to achieve. I don't want you to look at the Ableton Live synthesizers and said like, oh, look, I know how to use this. I want you to look at any synth in the universe and be able to use it. Like, that's the point of a person like us. Like, we need to be people who are not like locked into one DAW or not locked into one thing. We have to be people who can just grab anything and just use it, you know. So that's where I'm trying to go with this. And well, usually synths are played with keyboards. I said usually because not all of the synths have actual keyboards, and actually there are huge modules that don't even have a keyboard at all, and that you can do them. You can use them in other ways, or you can control them by sequencers, software, or by other instruments, via MIDI, etc. So, yeah, I mean, I guess that we're not so much in the mood of philosophy today because everything is so strange, but I mean, I wanted to ask this question, like, do you think that the mind is capable of infinity? You don't think so? You don't think so. Okay, there is a no here. That's great that there is a no here. Anybody has a different point of view? The mind is capable of infinity or not? No. We have two no's. Okay, so I'm going to say a word. I'm going to say...
What do you mean by infinity? Like, infinite amount of information?
Yeah, something. No, I mean, can the mind generate infinity?
It can generate infinity.
Mm-hmm.
Like, more you progress, more you forgot
Uh-huh.
from the lower levels of this infinity.
Okay. Why did you say no? I'm curious. This is really cool. Why did you say no?
Осмысляя, мы не можем это понять.
Бесконечность, мы не можем это понять.
Да, или бесконечность.
Мгм.
Но может быть как бы в несознательном пространстве, когда мозг оперирует на этих чипах.
Yeah.
Вот, но так-то я не считаю.
Окей. Смотрите мой концепт. Например, я говорю сейчас слон. Как был... Я сказал слово слон. Как был твой слон? У него есть... Ну, что еще есть, не знаю. Ага, what did you saw? You saw ears of elephant. What did you saw, Paulina, when I say slon? Huh? What is that? Ah, the nose. I see a elephant dressed like in the 90s with a graffiti can on his hand, and it's a skateboarder elephant. Like, how is your elephant?
I saw a pink elephant because once I saw a video about keep together. Don't think about pink elephant.
And then you thought about the big elephant. How was your elephant? Simple. I actually I had a second elephant in my head now, which is a robot elephant I saw yesterday in Thailand in some temple that they usually use an elephant for a traditional ritual. And so some animal rights activists complained, and so they built a robot elephant to make the ritual. So I just saw a robot elephant. Well, we haven't let you answer, sorry. Aha, Dumbo. Aha, so that was, and which one, yours?
Just the whole simple elephant, gray elephant.
Gray elephant?
Yeah, in a white room.
So, I mean, I like this. I believe that the mind is capable of infinity. I use this point to prove that. You know, it's like, how many elephants can we think? Maybe, or you could argue as well, because I don't think that you guys are right, or I'm wrong, or you're right. I mean, we cannot understand this. I agree with you. But we have two options. Either the mind can produce infinity, which means we can be here until the end of the universe thinking about different combinations of elephants, or we can do this with a very large number, which is not the same as infinity. Most likely, it looks like that. Do you understand what I said? Yeah, I mean, this is just a case. I mean, a very large number, it's not infinity, I agree, but it's kind of like, I mean, how many galaxies are there? 100,000 million galaxies, and how many planets are in each star? It's like 8 planets around each star, and how many millions of stars are in each galaxy? Like 100 million, so it's like 100 million by 100 million by 8, so what's that number? It's like, it's so large. Yeah, it's like Googleplex or something. It's like such a large number that I agree that it's not infinity, because infinity is infinity, and I really take this seriously, but what we can do with our minds is almost close to infinity, or absolutely very large. I mean, if you try to imagine how many elephants we can just think here, we will get to a very large number. I mean, if you see all the variables that you can permutate there. So I'm telling you this, that with some very simple concepts, you can create a lot of complexity. That's kind of where I'm going. And just changing small parameters can create very, very, very large differences between things. So I guess this was some ideas that when I was building these lectures, I have it there. They're like, I mean, just so we understand that, like, the size of numbers, like, this is a really interesting thing. I don't know if you ever thought about this. Like, if you were going to count from 1 to 1 billion, if you were going to count to 1 billion and one by one, it will take you kind of like 31 years. Like, to if you if you start counting from 0 to 1 billion, and this is if you read, if I don't mistaken, this is if you exactly if you do like 1 hour. What? Where does it says? 1 number per second. Exactly. I heard 1 hour per second, without breaks for sleeping and eating, and living. So, I mean.
Actually more, because it's impossible to say numbers like 22.
Correct. In 1 second. Exactly. In 1 second. I mean, I'm putting this there so you feel how big 1 billion is. Like, I mean, or how many things we can think of. Like, think about this. 1 billion, okay? I mean, I'm going to talk about the universe for a second, because I love to talk about the universe. This has nothing to do with our course right now, but I just want you to feel how big the universe is. Like, you cannot count to 1 billion. There are 100 billion stars in our galaxy. And there are 100 billion galaxies. And each one of them has 100 billion stars. So, I mean, it will take you something like 3,000 years maybe to count all of them, something like that. Or if you just count them one by one from 1 to 0. So that's one of the reasons why I always have energy, and I'm always so inspired, because I just feel this. I feel them. I feel their music. I feel the entities there. I feel their love, everything, etc. So anyways, how many galaxies in the universe. This is what I was saying. It's kind of like, I said 100 billion. This guy is kind of saying 200 billion. So you get the point. I mean, the universe is huge. That's exciting. But most importantly, what I want you to understand is that I think that the mind is capable of infinity. And I think that synths are machines that can allow us to do almost infinite things. And that's really cool because you can really put them together and build whatever sound that exists or it doesn't. So in principle, synths can create unique sounds. But it's interesting that synths were created to imitate real sounds, not to create infinite amounts of sounds. I mean, the goal of a synthesizer was like, let's replace these stupid orchestras. We don't want this stupid orchestra. We want some robot to play this orchestra, or we want a machine to play this orchestra, or we want to just like be able to carry this orchestra with us and move it somewhere without having to deal with 100 people. So that was the main point. Let's create something that imitates real sounds, and then it turned out that when you open that genie out of the bottle, what came out was a machine that can produce infinity, practically, which is pretty cool. Lucky for us, great. I understand that you could challenge this idea of mine that, hey, what do you mean about creating infinity? All the synths sounds like synths, You know what I mean? Do you understand what I mean by this? It's like a synth doesn't sound like a dog barking, or does it? I mean, I know synths that really sounds like a dog barking. I really have seen this. There is a patch in one of the Arturia synths that is called, the patch is called ah, like that, like when you see a little animal and you're like, ah, the patch is called like that, like ah, and it's like something that sounds like a mouse or something. Like so I mean, the reason why all synths sounds like synths is because they're built on similar principles, but you could take this to another level and make things that are truly unique and truly crazy and just make infinite sounds. So it is very exciting. Again, I always, my problem with the world is that people are not just like every second of their lives just like looking outside of the window and being excited about what's going on. Obviously, I guess that's never going to happen, but that's my problem. I'm kind of like, world, why are you not doing like that? But if I would tell you, man, guys, look at what happened to me yesterday. I was in my home and an alien gave me a machine to make any sound I want. You would scream right now. You would get out of the room. You will not believe me. You would be like, what the fuck is going on, man? Like, are you crazy? And it turns out that I have the same machine, but it was just made by humans. And then it's just not exciting anymore because an alien didn't make it. And it's like, come on, dude, like it's the same machine. Like it's just, I hope that you get my point. We touch these things, we work with them, and we forget that they are really interesting and they're really deep and that they're capable of things as close to infinity. So, okay, if we're going to look at the history of this, where can we start? So before the 1800s, I mean, I kind of was thinking like, what can be something like a proto-instrument that was like a synth that happened before synths, and the furthest thing you can see is like these music machines, but they are not synths at all. This is really not a synthesizer. You cannot say that this is the first synth or something like that. The closest thing I found to a synth that it's like in history, it's an instrument that was built in Persia, it's a fucking crazy thing. It was like around, I think it says here, the year, I don't remember, right now, 9th century. It's like, imagine a thing that you were blowing some air into it, and then there was, depending on where the air was going, it was like different tubes, and then if you open this tube and close this tube, like, it was sounding in a certain way, but if you close the other tubes, it would sound in another way and stuff like, but I mean, I understand that that's not exactly a synth, but it's the closest thing, because before the 19th century, the 20th century, sorry, everything that we had was kind of like mechanical devices like this that would create music, and or what's the name of this, like piano rolls and things like that, like yeah, like mechanical pianos and things like that. But these are not synthesizers because they're not creating a new sound from simpler parts and creating something more rich and more complex. So there is nothing to talk about really before the 20th century if we're going to talk about synths, kind of like, or well, I wouldn't say 20th century, but late 19th century, 20th century. So, by the way, of course, I'm not an expert. Maybe I will miss some key things. I don't know. This is the result of my research, and let's see what we got. So, it all starts with the experimentation with electricity in the late 19th century. Like because you need electricity to make a synth, for sure. There is a guy called Elisha Gray who realized that you can control sound with vibrating an electromagnetic circuit. Like one of the things that I think that accelerated, the discovery of synthesizers was the building of train tracks. And when we started electrifying trains, because trains have spinning things and electricity. And when you have a spinning thing, you have an oscillator. That's what an oscillator is. It's a spinning thing. And actually, many of the first synths that we started building were rotating things that imagine that you had like one cable here. I'm being very simplistic. One cable here and another cable that is rotating. So it's like, ooh, 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 ooh. And then you do it this very fast, and then you end up with a pitch. Ooh, because, I mean, if you repeat something too much, if I clap and I just repeat this clap 420 times in a second, 420, no, how much is a... 440, 442. If I repeat that 442 my clap, you will hear a la, right? So if I just grab the same and I put two magnetos next to each other and they make an interference and I just like start spinning that really fast and I put like some way of extracting that information, I will get a synth. So that is vibrating. So initially, as long as you could have an electrical current and with a vibration resource and the possibility to amplify such a current, you could generate sound. This is really cool. In 1901, this kind of like considered to be the first synth, sort of. There was a thing installed called the Telharmonium, which was a whole room in the opera, New York Opera House, which was like an attempt of building kind of like the first grand scale device of this rotating electrical system that I was telling you before. And we will talk about the Telharmonium in a bit. This is really funny story, the story of the Telharmonium. And of course, we need to talk about Liev Theremien, which is a very important person in the history of electronic music and in the synthesizer. So he devised, that's for many considered to be the first like synth, like actually the first thing, the synth that you can move, that you can take somewhere, that you could do something with it. Because I mean, the Telharmonium, you will see right now, it failed spectacularly, and it was a whole house or something. So obviously, when we're thinking about the story of the synth, we need to give Theremien his credit. And then there is a person called Lawrence Hammond. You have heard about an organ called the Hammond organ, like it's his organ. And he started producing this device, I mean, I think a bit earlier than 1937, but this is kind of when it was already coming out. And again, like it was like this electrical current next to a rotating device that was created an oscillation, and this was producing a signal that was being amplified through a speaker in a cabinet. So the Telharmonium, like it was this thing. This is like outside of the New York Opera House or something. I don't know if it's outside. Maybe this is inside. I really don't understand this so well. But it had like this huge set of motors, and it was kind of converting sound via telephone receiver. So it was kind of like using telephony and rotating engines. And I mean, the rotating engines were like incredibly huge. And the wheels were made to spin at the rate of each pitch. So I mean, this thing was kind of like the size of me. I mean, it was like a gigantic thing. And the reason, what is really funny, is why it was shut down, because it was such an incredibly gigantic electric device that was capturing radio transmissions of the American Navy. And so people there were walking around the New York Metropolitan Museum, and it was like hearing secret information or something. And so the army came in like, you're going to shut this shit right now. And so, yeah, they had to close it because of that. So that kind of was the spectacular failure of the Telharmonium. Huh? Ah, yeah. Ah, nice. Nice, nice, really cool, really cool. I didn't know about him until I started building this presentation and stuff. Yeah. So I remember I wanted to write something. That's why this is in red. Sorry, I didn't update this slide, but when I gave this lecture once, I guess somebody mentioned to me the Rhythmicon, which is also a very old instrument, and this is a display of the Rhythmicon. Yeah, you see, like there we have like the spinning waves. These sounds, man, they're so cool. They're pretty vintage. They're really vintage. Like they're like 1920s vintage. Yeah. So cool, man. I want this device so much. By the way, I think that I'm. Are doing it. Cool. Yeah, no, we need to. Cool. Cool. Awesome. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Nice. Nice. Yeah, well, I mean, just wanted to feel this. Great. Yeah. No, that's pretty cool. How far you can get with this thing. Okay, let's move on a bit, but I just wanted you to feel this. That's a rhythmicon. So, okay. Wait, I got lost. So, okay, after this, our story keeps evolving because, I mean, initially, one of the main problems of audio at the beginning of the history of audio was that, wait a second, there was no kind of like a good form of amplification, basically. Like, that was one of the main problems that we had at the beginning. So things were very quiet, you can do large-scale things, and then the vacuum tube appears, and it changed the whole scene, obviously. And so thanks to the vacuum tube, a big range of electronic music instruments were invented, and they started becoming more accessible. Electric pianos, guitars, Hammond organs, theremins, etc. That was like the electronic music scene of the beginning of the 20th century. And until the 50s is when we started seeing for the first time instruments that kind of look like what we know today. So you see, it's super new thing. It's like something that started kind of like what we consider to be the modern era of synthesis is kind of like started in the 1950s. And well, like always, war, it's always terrible for everybody, and it's always good for electronic music. Sorry for saying that dark joke, but because kind of like war in a way provided a lot of electronic components that then the Second World War, I mean, that then were available for people to create new instruments that look like the ones that we like today. So, well, obviously, initially we have this like synths, the telharmonium, trautonium, the ondes martenot, and the theremin. And the Hammond organ was a big part of this. We discussed it already. And in 1957, there is a guy called Harry Olson, together with a guy called Herbert Bellar, who made the first kind of like programmable synth. That is like something that you could like actually input a program into it. And this was called the RCA Mark II sound synthesizer. What do I mean by a program? You see, like that thing that was rotating there, you kind of like can modulate sound by changing some parameters, but you cannot tell it before you touch it or see it what you want him to do. Like when you open a synth and you select like a preset, you're loading a program into it. You're saying to the preset, to the synth, like behave like this. So obviously people wanted to do this, and in the United States they built the RSA Mark II sound synthesizer. And this instrument had like a punched paper. Have you ever seen this like way of inputting program into a computer that was like a piece of paper with a lot of holes, like tick, tick, tick in it? Yeah, you will see it in a second. So it had a punch paper tape that controlled an analog synthesizer that had 750 vacuum tubes. So you can imagine how complicated it was to run that thing. And nowadays, it's there still. You can go and see it. I mean, if you go to America, it's in New Jersey. And yeah, and it was used exclusively by a composer called Milton Babbitt. We're going to hear a piece by him, who was writing music for this synthesizer in Princeton University. So this is kind of like how it looked like. Let me see if this is the... what's up with this? Yeah. I don't know why this is here. Sorry, I haven't seen this presentation for a long time, but I guess that I added this as I was discussing with the guys. I was just talking about like how different in modernity things this, and this is amazing. This is a market in China, in a city called Shenzhou or something like that. And I mean, just imagine how many scenes you can build nowadays with this amazing. Imagine like going to Nowy Cheryomushki or something like that, or one of those centers, but what they sell there is just computer components, like not even electronic components. Well, there you go. Like not computers, but electronic
source the
components,
parts
literally,
and
like you see, like you can
bulk
buy
if you
whatever,
wanted to do it.
I
Here's
don't
a
know,
bunch of lasers for
piece of chips, chips and things, and like just like to build your own systems, computers, like
This guy probably
boards
took
and
the
everything.
PCB
Like
manufacturer. And this is
so, I mean, I was just kind of like, I guess that when I added this to this presentation a while ago, I was just trying to imagine like how much these people will dream about having something like
these are the
this
things you,
nowadays.
like,
And there we
get
go,
for your-
we have it. So, but that's kind of not, I wanted to go, that's really weird that this slide is here. Let me just fix this and kind of put it, yeah, at the end of this conversation for the future. Oh, I made a mistake, sorry. And so here we're going to see the RCA Mark II. So check it out, like this little video of how it works. And I don't know why somebody, this is so funny that they decided to use this photo, but this is a song made with the RCA2, but I don't know whoever loaded it. And you know, when I gave this lecture for the first time, I didn't notice this when I built the presentation, and then everybody started laughing, and I was like, "What the fuck is going on?" And then that's when I noticed, like, "Oh shit!" Like, you forgot the option.
In another field,
This is the
music can
Telharmonic.
now be produced
Sorry, the
entirely by
RCA.
electronics. No known instruments.
Notice that the music was classical music, right?
In another field, music can now be produced entirely by electronics. No known instruments are involved. Coded information is punched out. An electronic music synthesizer does the rest. This is music with a strictly electronic beat.
me try and show you how we get some of these sounds. First of all, none of them exist as a particular sound as they would on an electronic organ. There's no magic button marked trumpet or violin or drums. You have to build every sound. And to start to build these sounds, you have to start with something pretty simple. And here are the simple things we start with. There are 5 of them. The simplest one of all is something that any lab technician must have seen at one time or another. It's called a sine wave. It's very smooth, very flute-like. A little bit more complicated wave is called sawtooth. And it's called sawtooth because on an oscilloscope screen it looks just like a sawtooth. And this one is a little richer, a little reedier, and it resembles a lot of sounds found on home electronic organs. Something in between those last two, and a very useful sound indeed, is something called triangular. And it's kind of a pointed sine wave. So you can see it's a little brighter than a sine wave. This one's called pulse wave, and I'm just going to show you how it swings into a thing called square wave. It's up, down, just like a switch. If you flip a switch, you're making a pulse wave. If it's an even off, on, then it looks on an oscilloscope very symmetrical, and it's called a square wave. And if I take the time that it's on and make it different from the time that it's off, it changes quality. Listen to it. It shifts interior. It's a very useful sound. The last of which is probably the least useful, although you'd never want to be without it. It's very colorful, very coloristic. In its pure form, it sounds like surf or a steam sound. It's called white noise. Now I'll patch this up here into one of my output modules and try and show you how with these primitive sounds we start to get some very musical sounding things. First of all, here's a sawtooth wave that's coming out of an oscillator. Going into a mixer, coming up into what's called a filter, which is going to remove parts of the sound, either the top or the bottom part, much like bass and treble controls do on your, high fidelity system. And by hitting a note on the keyboard now, I'm connected up, so I'll hear that one sound. It's a very low sound. It's very bright. If I manually turn this knob, you'll listen to the sound get considerably duller. Here it gets very dull down here, it's very bright here. Instead of doing this manually, I can do it automatically with what's called an envelope generator. It generates the envelope being this type of motion that I'm shaping the tone with. So I'll do it this way. And that can be speeded up till we almost start hearing a plucked string. If we turn that around and make it open up instead of closing, it does this, which was quite a surprise when I first heard it. Has almost a trumpet-like quality or trombone quality in this range. Let's show you how one of these sounds might be laid in to a piece. Okay, we're in tune. Everything sounds like it's about right. I'll start the A track, and you'll hear all the other components of this score, and I'll add in the solo.
The development of modern electronics made it possible to recreate music from its component parts, its tones.
Well, you're looking at one of the very first 8-track machines. We used it for switched-on Barkwell tempered synthesizer right through a good half of Clockwork Orange.
Wendy Carlos in her studio in Greenwich Village is one of the pioneers of synthesized sound. Her controversial versions of the classics, created entirely electronically, put machine-made music on the map. Put machine-made music on the map. On the map.
Right now we're listening to the 8-track, and we're mixing, sort of playing the role of the conductor, putting together, in this case, a pair of tracks which has all of the string section. That sounds like this. There's a harpsichord track, and 2 flutes. And there's this nice solo that's split up into 2 tracks. Let's put them all together. I think it needs a little more echo. Yeah, that's good.
Her early work was with a Moog synthesizer. Though it's a museum piece now, when it was first introduced, it opened the door to a world of music synthesis. It works by first generating these harsh,
I
bright...
guess we will repeat a lot of the information we already discussed here. I just like to see her working in a different moment, you know.
Unlike the...
Okay, so we change now to another scene.
It was overtaken by a second revolution, controlling individual tones by computer.
Unlike the Moog synthesizer, we're not going to be taking away, tearing down bits of a very bright wave. Instead, we're going to put together little overtones, pieces of sounds, characteristic of all sounds, and assemble them additively rather than subtracting.
So there she was talking about the difference between additive synthesis. We will see this more carefully later, but there she's talking about the difference between additive synthesis and subtractive synthesis. So, like I told you, in one option you have an oscillator and you remove parts from it. In another one you just have like all these little chunks of sound and you put them together without filtering them directly.
Parts that we don't want.
By adding tones, one at a time, Wendy Carlos is able to build precisely the sound she wants. This is the beginnings of a xylophone.
Now, obviously, if we want to make that sound like a xylophone, we're going to have to make it speak more quickly. So I'll shorten.
I really care that we watch this with attention, just to because what I care about this is that I want you. I mean, I think that the way most of you and me too interact with synths nowadays is through presets, which sucks, which shouldn't be like this. The reason why I myself finds using a lot of presets, it's a matter of just time. I don't have time to like sit down and sculpt all my sounds. But there is a reason why you should try to sculpt all your sounds. It's a very powerful exercise for your head. Like, look at this person, what she's doing is like, she wants to recreate the sound of a xylophone with a synth. And in order to recreate the sound of a xylophone with a synth, she has to really very well imagine how the xylophone looks. And she needs to visualize that the xylophone has a metallic thing that is hitting another thing. And so she's picturing in her head how the sound is produced and trying to reverse engineer it in her head and doing like a Fourier analysis of it, actually, in her head, which is another part of humans that I find really crazy. You have a freaking DAW in your head. Like, how that is possible, I don't know. But you can kind of like hear something and imagine and do a Fourier transformation in your head. You can just like split this into the basic components and just like imagine how they would put together. It's very abstract, but that's what she's doing at the moment.
The attack from being about a half a second.
She wants to make a xylophone.
There. Now it's getting on almost instantaneously, but it's lasting too long. Let me drop that down a bit. Ah, this is much more like a xylophone. Well, that one sounds pretty good. So I'll take that pattern and play a simple music phrase.
And that's adding little pieces of sound.
Now
there.
she
It's like a
specifies 3 more pure tones in the proportion she already knows a real xylophone produces.
Now I'll put in all 4 of them.
Well, it sounds like a xylophone.
Now this is something that's very close to being a replica of a xylophone, but there's an element that's missing, and that is the hammer noise that you get with the real instrument when the mallet impacts against the wood.
For this final touch, she adds an electronic shake to each sound component.
With shake. Without shake. Nice. So, what happens after Wendy, Carlos?
Let me start.
I guess that we arrived to the 70s, more wilder era, and something really important happened in the 70s. And I guess that I'll see this, and then we will go from the lecture. We will close the lecture. So, in the 70s, something happened that was really important, which is that Moog companies released a synth called the Mini Moog Model D, which is something, a synth that many of you already may have seen, like in some software or something like that. And it became a huge hit because it was the first synth that was really easy to move around, that was portable. So, I mean, obviously to move the freaking Moog modular, like, let's go on tour. It's like, take the Moog modular. It's like, nope. But the Mini Moog Model D gave that capacity. And so it meant that it could go on tour. And it also gave the musicians the pitch wheel functionality. So it started giving the capacity to make some little, like, special modulations and bend tones like guitars do. And around this era, also a synth appeared called the ARP 2600, which is a pretty epic synth that we still use nowadays a lot, and that it has been reissued recently. There is like a new version of it. I mean, it's the same, but the same company reissued it. And these were monophonic synths that had like kind of patching modular patches as well. But it had the patches now hidden. I mean, you couldn't like patch it with cables like you could do with the Moog modular. They were more like patchings that were rewired, pre-wired, that's what I wanted to say, behind the scenes by the manufacturer. So obviously, when we talk about monophonic synths, I mean, now I'm introducing a little bit of concepts, and I of course know that many of you know this, but when we're talking about monophonic synths, we're talking about synths that can only play one voice at the same time. So if you play 2 notes, you just touch them at the same time, it will only play 1. It will not play 2. And you would say, why would I want that? Well, the thing is not that it's made because you wanted it to be like that. It's just like that was a technological limitation when they were created. And nowadays, for example, when you have like a Moog synth emulator in your computer, and then they're trying to emulate how the old Moog synth was, they are monophonic, but they give you a polyphonic function, like in case you want to make it sound like more rich, if you want to. But monophonic obviously play 1 note at the same time, and polyphonic make more than 1 note at the same time. So that's just very stupid, but I want us to just like use the right terminology. So that's why I kind of like remind us that this is what they are. And that's the Mini Moog, yeah, which is pretty sweet synth. And we are going to analyze this synth very carefully and to understand what is here. But you will see that all synths are kind of built with the same principles in hand, and you will be able, hopefully, to understand what this ends, kind of like how all of this works. I mean, I just want you to feel also that this is a computer device, kind of. It looks like this, a whole bunch of resistors, capacitors, condensers, and etc., potentiometers, and things like that. I'm not an expert. This is the schematics of the Mini Moog, by the way. So signal journeys through paths and new waveforms are created by electrical synthesis. And we discuss 1 second the Mini Moog for a moment, and this is going to be a video from Robert Moog, actually the person, and just a little bit of history
processor.
of Mini Moog here.
The year Walt Disney World opens for business. It's 1971, the year of the first microprocessor. The year Walt Disney World opens for business, and the year Alan Shepard played golf on the moon. But it was also a time when humble engineers conversed with musicians who were at the forefront of technology. These two very different groups of people were speaking of the future, and by 1971, the sound of the future was largely created by one instrument, the Mini Moog. Hello, you don't know who I am, and really, why would that matter when I'm surrounded by such elegant machines such as these? And it was the predecessor of these machines, the Mini Moog Model D, that changed the face of popular music around the world. Suddenly, the Mini Moog seemed to be everywhere. It was quickly embraced by the gods of the new progressive rock, where fantastic imagery and futuristic sounds were the order of the day. But the Mini Moog wasn't only the domain of long-haired rockers in flowing capes. It was also represented in every major musical genre of the decade. Jazz heavies like Chick Corea used the Mini Moog to invent a new method of soloing, bending notes courtesy of the pitch wheel, a radical new controller design that set the instrument apart in the eyes of performers. And Kraftwerk, that legendary German band of electronic pioneers, used the Mini Moog to craft their vision of tomorrow.
That's Trent Reznor there. That's a Moog Voyager. It's a newer version. But the next video I really want to watch it is actual Bob Moog. I want you just to see him, like the person who created this scene.
The father of the modern synthesizer
by the
is
way,
undoubtedly
that thing that remains from whatever was there before, that's the telharmonium. That's the telharmonium, the instrument I told you at the beginning. Like that's a view inside of it. Like yeah. So imagine like. Exactly. These two comments are great, and like that one I wanted to say as well is like there is a problem with channel 1. Like how do we fix this? So okay.
The modern synthesizer is undoubtedly Dr. Bob Moog. The Moog modular synthesizer first became widely heard in 1968 on a record called Switched On Bach by Walter, now Wendy, Carlos. It was big brother to the best-known synthesizer of all time, the Mini Moog.
This is the last off the production line. It was made in 1980, the last of about 12,000 that were made between 1970 and 1980. It's an analog monophonic synthesizer. That means it makes the waveforms by electronic means, and it plays one note at a time. In an analog synthesizer like this, we start out with an oscillator. An oscillator produces a steady pitched sound. And in this synthesizer, we can control the oscillator sound from either the keyboard, from the pitch wheel, or automatically through modulation. The oscillator has a waveform, and that determines the harmonics. Here's a triangular wave, sawtooth, square, and two rectangular waveforms. With all those harmonics, we can shape the sound through filtering. That is, we can cut out these harmonics as the sound goes on. Here's a filter which cuts out the harmonics starting with the highest. Another important aspect of the sound is its envelope, how it builds up and decays as it goes on. In an analog synthesizer like this, there are 4 parts to the envelope. The attack, which is the rise, the decay, which is the fall from the highest point, the sustain, which is how loud it is as it continues, and then the release, which is how rapidly it dies to zero when you let go of the key.
Of an envelope together, but just quickly, I just wanted to show you this. I mean, an envelope of a synth, it's literally like a fader. That's all that there is. It's like, look, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna make myself to have a slow attack, a high sustain, and then a slow release. Like, I just did an envelope to myself with my finger. I mean, I'm doing this stupid thing that I just did. It's just so you, because all of these concepts, when you're starting and when you're trying to visualize this, they seem to be so far away from us. Like, how does it even work? Come on, like, what the hell is that? It's like, it's literally just an electronic fader, literally. And this is literally an EQ, like, and it's an EQ, and you can then put those things to work by controlling them not digitally, with electricity. So I just want you to lose this like mystics behind it.
Here now I have a slow attack and slow decay and fairly low sustain, so you can hear each individual part. First the attack, then the decay, then the sustain, and finally I let go of the key, the release.
Yeah, okay, so that's Bob Mook. So I guess that's where we'll stop for now. Let me see what's coming next. Yeah, that's a great place to start. So next week we will just grab the Minimoog in a computer, and we are going to just like kind of understand each one of its parts, and we're going to build some sounds with it, like just right away. Let's see what oscillator 1 does, what oscillator 2 does, like how do you operate this thing. And you will see that the principles are the same on every single synth in the world. Once you learn how to use this guy, you will learn how to use them all, kind of. Like, not so much, but close to that. So thanks. I hope that was cool, and I'll see you next week, I guess. Attendance. One last thing, tomorrow meeting. I really want you to be there because I'm not going to talk exactly about what happened in the show. It's just like more principles of concerts and stuff like that I want to discuss with you. So if you want to be there, great. If you don't want to be there, that's also great. It's optional. Yo, bro, we have lecture in next door in 408. Yeah. And whoever is there, I will kick them out because I really need 408 without a question. Oh, fuck. I left my iLock at home. Okay.